Consumers want to buy what their values align with, and they want to give back to farmers and ranchers in that way.
Welcome to Leaders of the West, a podcast for innovators and changemakers. I'm your host, Jessie Jarvis, the founder of the West, and I'm sitting down with agriculturalists, entrepreneurs, executives, and everyone in between with the goal of digging into the strategies, mindsets, and lessons that have been crucial to the success of ag and Western. Whether you're carrying on the next generation of your family's operation, starting something from scratch, or determined to climb up the leadership ladder, we're going to inspire you to continue to dream big, growing not just you, but the future of agriculture and Western as a whole. Let's go.
Have you ever hired somebody and you know within the first week, it's just not going to work out? That is the worst feeling ever. Not because they're a bad person, but because something just didn't align, whether it's expectations, communication, the fit. And by that point, you've already invested the time and the training and the money into this person, and then you feel like you're starting back at square one. I have watched it happen to great employers over and over again. So we put together a free guide that covers the biggest hiring mistakes that we see in agriculture and Western industries and how to avoid them. Things like writing vague job descriptions, skipping onboarding, and not really defining what success in a role actually looks like. It's short, it's practical, it just might save you from your next headache, and it's absolutely free to download. So I will drop the link in the show notes so that you can easily go find it and get that delivered right to your inbox, because hiring the first time is always cheaper than having to do it again. Welcome back, you guys. We have an incredible episode coming at you today. Today's guest is somebody who she has spent her entire career at what I would consider to be the intersection of ranchers and buyers and consumers and the systems that really connect those three together. So Leann Saunders is the president of Where Food Comes From, which is the parent company of brands that you are probably a little bit more familiar of. For those of us in the ranching industry, obviously that's IMI Global. There's also Validus, Where Food Comes From Organic, and Postelsia. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and then Sure Harvest. So what makes Leann's perspective so valuable, in my opinion, is how she got there. So she started on the buyer side with McDonald's. She moved into building one of the earliest USDA process verified programs at PM Beef, and now working directly with producers across the country. So she is somebody who has seen this industry from every single angle. And today we're going to dig into what verification really means, why it matters, and where this is headed specifically for ranchers, knowing that that is the majority of you who are going to be listening, but then also what that means for consumers as well. So Leann, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Let's kick things off. I did give a little bio, obviously, but we like to hear it from the horse's mouth themselves, right? So tell us a little bit about your career.
So I grew up on a commercial cow-calf operation in southwestern Colorado. So my dad was a rancher and then went to Colorado State University, had a great mentor in a program where I was able to intern for Keystone Foods, which was a supplier to McDonald's Corporation. So it was one of the 5 at the time patty suppliers. And so my project there was to try to figure out more connections in their supply chains, which when you think about the diversity of the beef supply chain, particularly, it's vast, right? So I stepped my toe into kind of understanding how disconnected that was. And then I had the opportunity to then be employed by McDonald's Corporation by the head protein buyer and learned so incredibly much about how little we actually know as a rancher about how food gets to the consumer. And then also how little the consumer actually knows how that product gets to them and how little tiny changes can make a big impact in that particular supply chain. So I got to see that from the vantage of beef and chicken and pork and eggs and cheese because he was the buyer for all those particular products. So just amazing insight into these large supply chains. Then when I worked for PM Beef Group was this small packer that also had an international trading company. And what they were trying to do with some of the research that they were looking into is how do we ensure a good eating experience on a product that we're marketing to these specialty retailers in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And so I started working with what we called these process control points along the way that required us to go all the way back to the source of origin in order to ensure these palatability endpoints. And we did that using the USDA Process Verify program, which was a program the USDA started to try to control quality in these systems, in these disparate systems. So all of that, then, I learned so much from all these great mentors and then all these great players in these food supply chains about the importance of some standardization, about the ability for consumers to communicate what they want back in the supply chain and be able to purchase products that match their own values, knowing that could be different for different consumers. And then also starting to understand that because of the disconnect, there's a lot of people producing food that couldn't get their message to consumers. So all of that played into what became the foundation of the company of Where Food Comes From. So that was really long-winded, but
no, that is the perfect answer. And honestly, you got me to my next question. It's like you knew what I was going to do. You must have ESP of some kind. But so for people who are not familiar with Where Food Comes From, obviously it is the parent company of the 5 businesses that I mentioned at the beginning. But can you tell people a little bit more about it? Because for most, maybe they are very familiar with IMI. And so they think that you just go and do on-ranch verification. But there is so much more to Where Food Comes From than just the livestock side.
Yeah, great question. So IMI Global, a lot of people in the beef industry specifically, because that's where we started. And we were founded, and actually my husband founded the company in 1995. We founded it together, and he's the CEO, Leann Saunders. We still run it today and still happily married, which is kind of shocking that those two things still go together.
That totally is.
But when we founded the business, it was specifically kind of on the beef side and trying to share information. And then quickly, as we started working with what I would call like brands and retailers and food service operators, they were saying, well, could you do this same thing in other products? And so then we started to look at our businesses being able to do all things food verification for them. And then started to look at acquisition opportunities with like-minded entrepreneurs that had a specialty in other areas. So like Validus, for example, had created one of the first kind of animal welfare standards for dairy. And then they also had a strong footprint in broiler chickens and pork. And then we started getting the requests saying, hey, we want an organic product. Can you do organic certification? So we then acquired the first organic certification company, which was this little company called International Certification Services in Medina, North Dakota. And we were the biggest employer in that town. So that tells you how the size of Medina. And was founded, both those organizations, founded by entrepreneurs that believed in kind of authenticating and transparencies in these supply chains. Postelsia was similar in seafood. And then Sure Harvest was doing some of the same work, more in the world of sustainability metrics for specialty crops. So think almonds, think wine growers. So it was us trying to be all things food. And kind of what we think about is God food, right? Like, so whole foods that can get to people's plate.
Mm-hmm. So I just find this to be so fascinating because in reality, there is not a food that exists that, again, is a God food. It is a whole food that you potentially don't have a touch point with in some way.
Yes. I mean, that is really our sweet spot is food products. And especially what we say is kind of the peripheral around the grocery store. So think, milk and eggs and meat and vegetables and nuts and all those sorts of things.
Oh, that is just so incredible. When it comes to specifically talking about ranchers, they've probably heard the term third-party verification, but many of them maybe don't necessarily know what that means in practice. So break that down. What is it that you're actually verifying and what does it matter to people who buy those cattle or in the end are buying that product as beef?
Yes. So when we think about third-party verification, I start with the end. So I always think about the quote from Ronald Reagan where he said, "Trust but verify." And so what we do is a lot of the things that a rancher is doing already, we're coming in as a third party and ensuring what they say they're doing, they're actually doing. So we're that layer on top that allows consumers what I call an easy button with a seal on a package to say, okay, I can trust these livestock raising claims on pack because someone went in and checked it. Now, practically, what does that mean? It means we have interviews, right, with people involved in the operation. We ask them very critical questions about how they're raising their food and handling their food. We are going to look at records to support what they're saying. And then we have observations. So when we're talking about things like, say, animal welfare, we're going to observe the animals. We're going to observe, in the case of an environmental stewardship claim, the environment and the people and community. So it all weaves in together to validation of what someone is saying that they're doing.
And then specifically for the rancher, typically what comes along with that, and I think it's most noticeable when it comes to sales platforms for those who are selling, let's say on Superior or Western Video Market. Obviously, if you've ever watched one of those sales, there are a number of little buttons below the video of the cattle. And so it will say things like agent source verified or NHTC or all of this list of claims. And basically, and again, I don't want to take your words because I'd love for you to explain it more, but when a rancher has those, again, we'll call them buttons on their attached to their cattle, that means that it has been verified through a third party, which then it goes on to the feedlot. If they want to then continue the verification process, they have a whole other set of verification that they must do. So when a consumer buys a package of meat or eggs or whatever that looks like, and it has those on-label claims, that means that verification process was from the beginning of the animal to then the end of the animal.
That is correct. That was the perfect explanation of exactly how it works. I mean, I couldn't have said that better myself. You said it much better than I would have said.
I don't know about that. So the reason that I'm familiar with IMI is because my parents, they go through the process of third-party verification, and they've done this now, not necessarily for very long. So I believe that we've only done this now for like 3 or 4 years. Prior to that, they made those claims through an affidavit. But as technology and things go on, we have to also continue to rise to the occasion and to change the way that we're doing things. So we have started working with IMI. And that's really when I was brought into how the process works. I think that for those who are not necessarily doing it, they find it to be overwhelming or scary, or, there are a lot of limitations or excuses maybe that they make. Of course, there is paperwork, but it's really not that difficult. Can you kind of talk a little bit more? And again, it's going to depend based on the type of program that somebody is enrolling their animals in, but kind of generally speaking, what does that extra work look like? Because the reason that I ask this is, what is it when we put in the extra work? There's usually an extra payoff. And so one of the things that we know to be true, regardless of where you're selling your animals, is those animals that have third-party verification are typically going to sell at a premium.
Yeah, that's exactly true. So I think the first thing that you spoke about was the fear of engaging. So I think those that don't do it, that's the biggest barrier. They have this fear that it's just going to be too much. And then I think what they start to realize is a lot of the things that they're already doing. So let's take, for example, and I'm just going to use one for example, say the non-hormone treated cattle program. So it's called NHTC. That's a particular requirement in order for a packer to be able to export product to the European Union. So you take that, and that just means that the cattle have not been given added growth promotants from the beginning and then all the way through the supply chain. So what an verifier is going to be looking at when they look at the records is just making sure that's true. So making sure you don't have an inventory of growth promotants, that you can prove that you're not giving growth promotants, right? And it's pretty simple. It's just we have to verify the records and verify with you as that rancher that that's actually true. And then the value of third-party verification, like you were talking about, the bells and whistles when you sell through a video auction, for example, versus an affidavit is you then, as the rancher, get the full value premium for doing that work at the time you market the cattle. A lot of time with affidavit programs, as a rancher, you might get that affidavit after the cattle have sold. So did you really get the true value that you deserved as a rancher putting in that extra effort to make that livestock raising claim? Probably not. So what third-party verification does, and the way Superior and Western and Northern do that, is give you as a rancher full transparency to a buyer. And also what those bells and whistles have done over time to the buying network of cattle is those also tend to be the very best cattle. So producers that are engaging in these programs, ranchers and farmers that do this extra work and are proud of it and also want to showcase it, the third-party verification, the buying network knows that they're putting the very best into their cattle. So they know they're the highest quality, the best genetics, and they've been taking care of the best. So it's also reputation selling that you don't get if you don't do it up front and get the credit for that.
I love that you brought up the fact that this is stuff that people are already doing. You are basically just putting a timestamp or a signature to the fact that you did it. So again, for those who maybe are not going through the process of third-party verification because you think, oh, this is going to completely change my operation. No. What a company like this is, they are just coming and validating all of the things that you are already doing. And again, there is some documentation that is required, and especially different documentation for different programs, but it's not necessarily asking anything more of you. It is just verifying what it is that you're already doing, which I think is an important, I wouldn't want to say misconception, but definitely something that's important to mention.
Yeah, agree. And I think with really advanced producers that have decided that a particular livestock raising claim is important to them or a particular program, they've already made a decision that they want to comply with what that means. So then are there times when maybe they're not meeting the requirement? Yes, there's ways to then get there. We also have programs where they're based on continuous improvement over time. So we have a sustainability standard called CARE. It's our CARE certified standard. And that's a scored report where producers can look at continuous improvement over time when it comes to the metrics around sustainability, because sustainability is a journey. It's, you continue to work towards that. It's not an endpoint. So it is really trying to meet producers where they're at and help them then on this journey to how do I get better and how do I connect with consumers that care about what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, like I said, we've done it for the last 3 years, I believe, or my parents have at least. Justin and I do not for a specific reason, though. It has really been such an easy and seamless process. So let me kind of go into the reason, because this is the next piece that I wanted to get to is we see a lot of this when it comes to video sales or person-to-person type sales, but we typically don't see as much of this when it comes to those who sell through the sale yard. And the reason for that is any place that your animals are going to be taken in order to have that on-package claim, that step then has to be verified. So there are a small number of sale yards that are verified in the US, but I will say, so this is something that always kind of held us back from doing this, but we actually reached out to our local sale yard to ask them if they would be interested in going through the verification process so that we could do it as well. And they did. So just the importance of knowing that, because I remember at one time when we looked through the program, I didn't realize that the sale yard also had to be verified. And I thought, oh, well, that is kind of a limitation. It wasn't actually a limitation because you ask a question, you get an answer. What's the worst that they can say is no. But not necessarily all parties care to keep that verification. They don't necessarily have on-package claims, so it is not necessarily appealing to everybody. For people who want it, obviously, it is a requirement for them to buy cattle so that they can continue to make those on-package claims. But if somebody who is not going to be involved in that process is buying your animals, then it may or may not be necessary, which is why my husband and I don't do it. But we know that that will change at some point, and then we are absolutely going to get on the IMI program.
It's interesting that you're talking about this because it's kind of one of the things that we're focused on as an organization right now from an innovative approach, because we understand that that's happening. Like about, even with the ranchers and farmers that we work with, about 50% of their animals, of the cattle that were enrolled, may not go into a labeled program. So one of the things we're really focused on is how do we create some sort of rebate opportunity for the cattle that don't go through a program where there's a labeling claim. So it continues to incentivize uptake of these critical programs and for the ranchers to see firsthand that it matters. Even if it's going to someone who may not keep it intact with the labeling claim, it still matters to them for whatever reasons that might be. So that's kind of what we're hoping, Jesse, that like the next evolution is that you would see the value even if a buyer coming to the sale barn didn't buy them for that particular reason.
Yeah, no, and I think that is so forward thinking of you guys. Just really goes to show why you are a leader in the industry. I do kind of want to flip gears though, because so far up until now, we've talked primarily about those who are selling cattle and not those who are retaining them. But let's talk about ranchers who are selling direct to consumer. A lot of them aren't necessarily thinking about verification because they're not selling calves into that traditional premium structure, right? But many of them may or may not be making label-based claims, whether they're grass-fed, hormone-free, raised on the ranch, whatever it may look like. So how are direct-to-consumer operations substantiating those claims? And should they be thinking differently about verification?
So I think it's important to start thinking about verification, though it may not be required from a regulatory perspective in certain, right? So it's important to think about because what we can do as a third-party verification partner is with some of our marketing and promotion activities is further support some of those brands that want that elevated connection with consumers. From a regulatory perspective, if you're labeling product today with what's called livestock raising claims, in August of 2024, the Food Safety Inspection Service said, hey, we're going to start to crack down because there's so many of these claims made. There's not consistency. So they started really looking at how do we make sure we have standardized communication on claims and what that means so that consumers know that when they pick up a product that says product of the USA, that is consistent across the board. I think that's the other thing to start thinking about is making sure that there's consistency and honest communication with the consumer about what that means. The other thing that I think is of value to think about if you're a direct-to-consumer brand is look at the Power of Meat study that's done every year. It's a great study. A lady by the name of Anne-Marie, who's fantastic and for like the last 10 years has been putting together the study, talks about the trends with consumers and what they want to see. And I think when you think about the power of protein right now and everything that's going on with protein, which is so awesome, they also, though, have like these very discerning needs, like you were talking about. Some 46% of consumers today care that it's product of the USA. Another contingent, 35% care that it meets some sort of animal welfare standard. That for them is kind of this umbrella claim. And if it's grass-fed, they want to know that it's actually grass-fed or pasture-raised, what pasture-raised means. So I think some consistency is important. And then that connection with a third-party verifier that can help explain that story. So transparently posting those requirements, consumers can go look, say, oh, this is what that means. This is a technical, if they want to get that deep. So I think it's important even for the direct-to-consumer, even though they've kind of figured out that whole connection piece a little bit.
But I think still it is so important because it adds validity to what you're saying. It's not I'm just going to tell you this, but you can believe me if you want to. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. When you say this is backed up by somebody who is not getting paid based on the amount that you're going to buy this product for, and again, this could be eggs, it could be milk, it could be anything under the sun, as long as it's a whole food. I think that there is a lot of validity in being able to have that included on your website. And especially if you're somebody who is selling at a farmer's market, you're doing that in-person type touch point. When you're able to have those substantiated claims, I absolutely see this. If it doesn't already, will continue to allow people to charge more at the retail level.
Yes, agree. I feel like that's where the value transfer happens, is that consumers today, in fact, in the Power of Meat study, she talked about, we've had this change in purchasing power. So the millennials and the Z generation are moving into having more purchasing power and they care more about those things. And even if they don't have as much disposable income, they care about buying food that they think is good for their health And the claims get wrapped up in that for them. So I think that provides, to your point, more premium back to those direct-to-consumer brands as well.
Well, and really looking forward to the future, you chaired the U.S. Meat Export Federation. You have been in supply chain and marketing for decades now. Where do you see Verification's program headed over the next 5 to 10 years?
As I look to the future, and I wish I had a crystal ball, that would be way easier.
Don't we all?
It'd be easier to manage business today, wouldn't it? But when I think about where it's going, I think it's going to become more and more demanded because we have fewer and fewer consumers that are part of producing their own food, and they're second, third generation removed now. So I think it just becomes increasingly more important. I also, if you go to the grocery store today, you see the transformation in the last 15 years with how many different SKUs there are today and how many different products for just one thing. So that's also happening with, in the perimeter of the store, because it's not a one size fits all today. And consumers want to buy what their values align with, and they want to give back to farmers and ranchers in that way. So we're just really hopeful we can be the conduit to help farmers and ranchers sustain, being able to transfer down to future generations of farmers and ranchers, and that be prosperous for them. And then consumers to pay them to do that. And a lot of times that means paying a little bit more for your food, which I know is controversial right now. But I think consumers are willing to pay more for good food with people that care about the raising practices.
On the side of exports, because I think that is something that is incredibly important to continue to consider. Like you said, there are certain products that can or cannot be exported to the European Union based on those claims. So what is happening internationally that U.S. ranchers need to pay attention to?
It depends on, obviously, the commodity. It's a wide range of issues, but I think we'll stick to beef for the moment, since that's an easy one to kind of tackle. U.S. beef is demanded globally. So the U.S. beef industry has done a wonderful job of controlling quality and palatability and taste. And so even though right now it's the highest priced product around the world, it's still demanded in markets around the world. When it comes specifically to claims, then there are things that really matter. Animal welfare, which traditionally was mostly a North America, European type of demanded claim, start to see that now becoming more and more important to some of your ASEAN markets and some of our high valued markets like Japan and Korea. No hormones matters in a lot of markets. So whether it's an NHTC program or a verified natural program, the one thing that seems to be really growing globally is the focus on sustainability. Like, how do we continue to raise more protein for the world globally with fewer natural resources, so that we take care of those natural resources. So those roundtables happening around the world seem to also matter quite a bit and flood back then to the farmers and ranchers producing those commodities, whether it's eggs or chickens or beef cattle.
Oh, that is the perfect answer. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for a rapid fire round, but I do have one last question on this topic. If a rancher or even a sale yard, let's say, is listening to this and thinking maybe this is something I should look into, what is the first step?
So first step, I would say, is just to call us, and you can go to our website at wherefoodcomesfrom.com. Also at imiglobal.com, validus.com. We have .coms for everything, but wherefoodcomesfrom.com will get you to all those other answers. And talk to one of our sales team members. What they do is they'll talk to you and say, okay, what do you want to do? What's your interest? What programs are you interested in? And then they'll talk you through the different standards that we have and help you align with what it is you want to do with your marketing, because that's really, really important.
I guess while you say that, one other thing that I should mention, and I'm sure that you have a fact or figure, because we all know we're data nerds to a degree, right? Obviously, there is a cost to enroll your animals. But what is the typical return on that investment for a rancher?
The return on investment is wildly dependent on the commodity, right? So higher price commodities, so the return on investment is going to look different. For a beef animal today, if you're involved in a lot of these programs, say source and age verification, all the way up to a sustainability claim or an animal welfare claim, you'll see anywhere from at the lower end, say just source verify, a $5 per hundredweight premium on that feeder animal. all the way up to $15 per hundredweight. So what we use a round figure and say on beef cattle, say $100 a head is what we say. That certification can bring you an added value when you sell a feeder animal.
Wow. There's no reason not to do it. We have had such a great experience with it. But I think too, especially for those of you who are selling direct to consumer, I think that this is another important consideration. I think that consumers are never going to go backwards. They are only going to continue to expect to see these types of claims, and they are going to expect to have them backed up by somebody that is not you. We're all a little bit less trusting of people than we once were, right? None of us are going to put a $100 bill in the mailbox and send it off to our friend. So I think that it is just such an important business move for so many people, especially knowing that right now in the cattle industry, the market is great, right? It's really nice, but that's not necessarily always the case. And this is the type of program that continues to have a great return on your investment, regardless of what the market looks like. So I know we talked a lot about cattle and verification, but you are a powerhouse, Leann. So I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better in our rapid fire round. First question, what do you hope people remember most about you?
So I hope they remember that I was fair, always open-minded, high integrity, and probably the most important to me is that I was a good mother.
What is a non-negotiable in your life?
Non-negotiable in my life, integrity, honesty, and then being continually focused on my health and my faith. That was a lot of non-negotiables, right, Jessie?
I like that. Those are all very important, though. I would have to agree. If you were a professional athlete, what would your walk-up song be?
Ooh, I'm an X generation kid, so Eye of the Tiger. I remember Rocky running up the stairs. So when I played that was what I loved.
What is the smartest thing that someone's ever told you?
That one of the most important characteristics of a person is having self-awareness to know what you don't know and being able to admit that.
Oh, that is a tough one too sometimes, isn't it?
It is very tough.
Okay, last question for you. Favorite things. Do you have a book that you love, a podcast you religiously listen to, a program, a life hack, maybe just like a daily product that you swear by, something that has just changed your life and more people should know about it?
So I think favorite books, I love to read. I'm an avid reader. I love anything Kristen Hanna. I love her female characters in her books. My favorite is probably The Nightingale because I love historical fiction. I love working out. I feel like daily, if I don't work out, I suffer physical and mental health. So that daily workout is critical for getting up every day. So those would be the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Oh, well, those are absolutely top-notch recommendations. I'll make sure that we include the link to that book in the show notes, as well as the website for where food comes from, the phone number as well. Leann, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. The work that you guys do really is incredible when it comes to the payback that it has given families like mine across America and beyond. And also to know that consumers feel good about what it is that they're buying, because that is something that we have battled for a very long time, and we will never not do so, unfortunately. But at the same time, that still allows us to have the power and opportunity to continue to help bridge that gap and connect those dots. And you guys do that so incredibly well. So thank you so much for all of your work. You guys know you can find us next week. We're going to have a brand new episode of the show. It is also going to be a good one, so you're going to have to stay tuned.
If you loved this episode, do us a favor and share it with someone else who might find just as much value in it as you did. We're on a mission to continue to grow and strengthen the future of agriculture and Western industries, and you spreading the word helps us make more of a positive impact. It also makes a big difference when you take a minute to go rate and review the show. We can't thank you enough for listening, for sharing, and for loving Ag and Western as much as we do. We'll see you back here for our next episode.